When my stepmother started telling everyone that I was losing it, I could hardly keep from laughing until I learned why she was doing it. Let's just say she crossed the line and I decided it was time to show her exactly who she was messing with. Are you ready to hear what happened when I gave her a taste of her own truth? My name's Emma. I'm 28, and lately, my stepmother, Charlotte, has been getting on my last nerve. This woman, who's already pushing 50, always plays the role of the calm, perfect lady. You know, the kind who smiles, but you feel like you're being grilled by a school principal. And to her, I'm not just a kid, but, as she's called me, a problem. Over the past few months, she's been getting way too into my mental health and well-being. She'll casually bring it up over tea with relatives. Emma hasn't been herself lately, poor thing. You know, she's been through so much. And then she squints at me as if to say, "You all see it, right?" At first, I chalked it up to her constant need to be the one who gets it and controls everything. But then she went over the line, and it made me suspicious. Her little hints about my mental state kept popping up like a bad habit. Skeletons she was trying to drag out of the closet again and again. Even in front of my friends. One of them, Dan, even asked, "Emma, what's her deal? Is she accusing you of something?" I just shrugged, telling myself I was being paranoid. But you know what? She's always been one step ahead. Charlotte isn't the type to throw words around. If she was starting rumors, then there had to be something more to it. After that family meeting, which was more like a one-woman show, and guess who the star was? I couldn't shake the feeling that Charlotte was playing a game, and I was not the winning piece. Her heartfelt concern was so staged that I almost expected applause at the end. Charlotte suddenly decided she was an expert on my unstable behavior, dropping odd hints during family conversations. She'd tell them about my so-called forgetful moments and whisper how her heart breaks from worry over me. Honestly, I nearly laughed. But you know what was really unsettling? The others were nodding along with her like she was some kind of mental health guru. While I tried to shake off her all-encompassing concern, it became clear. She was definitely up to something. What kind of person even comes up with such ridiculous stories? But my well-meaning relatives seemed to swallow it whole. So I decided if Charlotte was weaving a web, maybe it was time to keep a closer eye on her moves. There was something off about the doctor's appointment from the start. Imagine this. A person who hadn't shown an ounce of interest in my life for years suddenly decides I need a routine checkup. Who does that? This definitely couldn't have been a coincidence. So I decided to play along and went to the appointment. I sat across from him as he started asking all sorts of questions. "Emma, how's your sleep? Any strange dreams? Feeling anxious at all?" He looked at me like I was about to start talking to imaginary friends. I barely held back a laugh. Then he hit me with a question that really threw me. "Have you ever felt, well, unstable?" That's when I realized this wasn't just a routine checkup. This was an interrogation, a "come on, just admit you're not all there" session. It was like they were prepping me, laying the groundwork for something much bigger. I walked out of that office trying to calm down. One thought kept racing through my mind. Charlotte. This was her doing. My loving stepmother had clearly decided I was now unstable and had arranged for a doctor's cameo in her little show. There was something off about the doctor's appointment from the start. Imagine this. A person who hadn't shown an ounce of interest in my life for years suddenly decides I need a routine checkup. Who does that? This definitely couldn't have been a coincidence. So I decided to play along and went to the appointment. I sat across from him as he started asking all sorts of questions. "Emma, how's your sleep? Any strange dreams? Feeling anxious at all?" He looked at me like I was about to start talking to imaginary friends. I barely held back a laugh. Then he hit me with a question that really threw me. "Have you ever felt, well, unstable?" That's when I realized this wasn't just a routine checkup. This was an interrogation, a "come on, just admit you're not all there" session. It was like they were prepping me, laying the groundwork for something much bigger. I walked out of that office trying to calm down. One thought kept racing through my mind. Charlotte. This was her doing. My loving stepmother had clearly decided I was now unstable and had arranged for a doctor's cameo in her little show. One day, I stumbled upon some court documents Charlotte had filed. That was the moment I knew for sure she'd crossed the line. Charlotte intended to strip me of my property rights, as though I'd already been deemed incompetent. I could hardly believe she'd stooped that low. She'd spent her whole life pretending to be caring and noble, and now, bam! She was trying to take everything I owned. I was stunned by her audacity. My first impulse? To confront her and make a scene, but common sense, however barely, held me back. I sought out a lawyer who'd dealt with schemes like this before and knew how to handle it. I told him all my suspicions and handed over the recording I'd managed to get. He listened and advised that we keep a low profile while we worked thoroughly. "We need more evidence," he said, pushing the papers aside. "I get that this is insane, but to beat her at her own game, you'll need solid proof. Otherwise, it's just your word against hers." I nodded, though my mind was churning with anger. It was harder than ever to just sit back and act like everything was under control. This time I went to see the doctor not for his advice on my so-called mental health. No, I was 100% prepared for this little concerned session. As soon as I sat down across from him, he started his lecture on how important it was to take care of myself, and how I apparently didn't understand my own condition. I was boiling inside, but I kept it together. Every word he said was being recorded. The doctor didn't hold back, moving on to more specific recommendations. "I'd suggest you stay in a facility, just for a couple of weeks, for preventative care, of course. This would put your family's concerns at ease." He said it so calmly, like he was asking me to sign a card. But I knew this was about more than just family concerns. It was all part of her plan. Sitting there, I nodded along, pretending to listen. But inside, I was ready to explode. This recording was exactly what I needed to move forward. When Charlotte launched into her usual speech about my mental health, I sat back calmly, listening to her well-rehearsed pauses as if she'd practiced them in front of a mirror. She had this caring expression. Classic, loving stepmom, desperately trying to save her troubled stepdaughter. But when she called me mentally unstable one more time, I pulled out my phone and hit play. "Here," I said calmly, as if it were no big deal. "Let's listen to what your dear doctor actually said to my face. Oh, and here's another one. Your chat with your friend about your brilliant plan." The silence in the room was so thick, you could hear the antique clock ticking over the fireplace. My relative sat there, eyes wide, jaws dropped, in complete shock at what was unfolding. For once, I and Charlotte both had everyone's undivided attention. She turned pale, grabbing for anything, armrests, whatever remained of her reputation. But the horror in her eyes said it all. This is fake!" She rose from her chair, trying to sound confident, but her voice wavered. "Emma, you're just..." "Oh, really?" I tilted my head, barely hiding a smirk. "Go on. Explain how your mentally unstable stepdaughter, managed to fabricate all this evidence. Or, wait, are you going to say I bribed the doctors too?" The family exchanged glances, and I could see the questions starting to form in their minds. Charlotte was mumbling, but every word that came out sounded hollow. When the recording ended, the silence in the room felt almost physical. Charlotte stood there, like a statue, grasping for any words that could help her out of this. But her classic caring stepmother mask had crumbled like a house of cards. All my relatives stared at her, and I saw the realization dawning in their eyes. This woman had been fooling everyone for years. The family council, which she herself had arranged, turned into her own trial. She scanned the room, hoping for even the slightest sign of support. But guess what? No one even considered defending her. Aunt Betty, her longtime ally, pressed her lips together and looked away, like she'd just tasted something awful. The legal investigation didn't take long. Charlotte found herself in the center of a scandal, and the court swiftly ruled to restore all my property rights as laid out in my father's will. This was her ultimate downfall, and now she was left to live in complete isolation, a persona non grata. Friends and acquaintances started turning their backs on her one by one. As for me, I finally felt a freedom I hadn't felt in years. I no longer had to fight for what was rightfully mine. No more schemes, no more plotting, no more living under the constant feeling that someone was out to harm me. At last I could breathe and put this dark chapter behind me, knowing that Charlotte got exactly what she deserved.